He walked into the sheriff's station soaking wet, wearing an old military coat and holding a single envelope. They laughed at him, called him a crazy old vet who'd lost his mind. But 45 minutes later, Homeland Security locked down the entire building, and every single person who mocked him, they were ordered to stand back and listen, because this man wasn't who they thought. And that envelope, it wasn't just paper, it was a key to something buried beneath their feet for over 40 years. It was a rainy Thursday evening in the quiet town of Hartsville, Alabama, the kind of place where nothing ever happens and everyone knows everyone, or at least thinks they do. The streets were slick with drizzle, storefronts dimmed early, and the sheriff's office glowed faintly under a buzzing yellow porch light. That night, a figure walked through the mist toward the station, coat soaked, boots heavy, steps deliberate. He wasn't in a hurry, he never was. 82-year-old Arthur Red McAllister looked like someone out of a black and white photo, with that old Vietnam jacket draped across his shoulders, medals barely visible beneath the grime and years. The deputies inside barely glanced up when he pushed open the glass door and asked in a firm but tired voice to speak with someone in federal command. One of them, a rookie barely out of high school, snorted. Another rolled his eyes and said, "Sir, you want the feds. You're in the wrong place. This here's Hartsville, not DC." But Red didn't budge. He clutched a worn envelope in both hands like it was a life vest, his eyes unwavering. Most would have waved him off. But the moment he sat down without invitation and said, "Tell your chief this concerns the file named Black Warden," the room went cold, like someone had turned the air down to freezing. Nobody knew what he was talking about, but something in the way he said it, calm, certain, unshaken, made them all stop smirking. Sheriff Don Bailey, a Gulf War vet himself, had been watching the scene through the office window, sipping bad coffee and thinking about clocking out. But when the young deputy came in and whispered, he just said something about Black Warden, Bailey's cup stopped midair. That name hadn't been spoken in 25 years, not even in briefings, not even during drills. It wasn't a public file, it wasn't a file at all. It was a ghost story passed between old hands in intelligence. The kind of thing that shows up on an unmarked folder with no return address. Bailey stepped out, stared at Red sitting in the corner like a statue, and asked his name. "Arthur McAllister," he replied. "But they called me Red back then." The sheriff nodded slowly, trying to piece it together, but one overeager deputy stepped in, dismissing the old man's words as babble. "We think he's unstable. Maybe dementia," he said. "Might be a danger to himself. Best to hold him." Bailey hesitated, then relented. Protocol was protocol. They cuffed Red gently, though he didn't resist, and led him to the holding room. But before they closed the cell door, he looked straight into Bailey's eyes and said, "You've got 45 minutes to make the call. After that, this place belongs to someone else." That wasn't a threat. That was a statement, and it hit harder than any warning siren. For the first 10 minutes, everything seemed fine. The rain tapped against the station windows, and the old file room fan squeaked on its usual rhythm. But then, the lights flickered once, twice, then went solid. Phones dropped dead. Radios stopped chirping. Body cams on the deputies froze mid-recording. Someone cursed, thinking it was the storm, until one of the computer terminals suddenly rebooted on its own. No password screen, just a blinking prompt. Then, like a ghost whispering in digital, a single line of text appeared: "Secure the veteran. Do not leave the premises." Federal response en route. Everyone stood still. No one typed that message. The system wasn't connected to public networks. That's when panic began to ripple under the skin of every officer in the room. Bailey called. The state line dead. Tried his secure phone dead. In 20 years of service, nothing had made his gut twist like this. He turned to the evidence locker, where Red's envelope had been tossed in a drawer like a forgotten piece of junk mail. And for the first time, he felt like it might explode. Then, without warning, 6 unmarked black SUVs pulled into the station. Lot in perfect formation, not a siren, not a horn, just the soft crush of wet tires on concrete. Homeland Security emblems flashed briefly as men and women in dark suits stepped out with synchronized precision. One woman in a rain-slick trench coat led the team. She held no weapon, no visible authority, but when she walked through the door and showed her ID to Bailey, he saluted before he even realized he had. Her name was Agent Elaine Booker. She spoke quickly, directly. Arthur McAllister is not under arrest. He is a federal operative with level 6 retired clearance. He activated a dormant directive 72 hours ago. We are assuming full control of this facility. Please stand down. And like that, the sheriff's office no longer belonged to the town of Hartsville. It was under federal command. The envelope, now labeled Priority Alpha 1, was removed from evidence with full protocol. Everyone in the room stared in silence, suddenly aware they had touched something radioactive without gloves. Inside that envelope wasn't a letter or a list of names, it was a key, titanium, etched with a sequence of numbers no one in the room could decode. Alongside it was a card, yellowed by time, labeled Project Candleline, with a symbol resembling a flame wrapped in a chain. The agents worked fast. Within minutes, they located a sealed door in the sub-basement of the sheriff's office, a door nobody even knew existed, hidden behind a false wall marked maintenance. Agent Booker explained, in clipped but controlled language, that during the height of the Cold War, strategic rural outposts were embedded within small-town infrastructures, disguised as ordinary buildings. Hartsville's sheriff's office had been built over one of them. The station wasn't just a hub for local law, it was a forgotten government shell for an early warning system tied to foreign surveillance signals. And Red had held the only key to wake it up. Sheriff Bailey stood in stunned silence as the reality settled over him. For decades, they'd been sitting on a powder keg of classified history. And Red, old man Red, who bought his groceries on Tuesdays and tipped waitresses with dollar coins, had known the entire time. "Why didn't you say anything?" Bailey asked him quietly. Red looked up from his chair, calm as ever. "Wasn't time yet," he said. "Wasn't my call to make." When Bailey tried to apologize for the cuffs, Red shook his head. "You were doing your job. I was doing mine." That hit Bailey harder than he expected. For all the lectures about respect and chain of command, nothing landed like the humility of a man who never demanded credit, who didn't need applause, just the chance to keep his word. Red hadn't come in that night looking for recognition. He came because it was time. That kind of loyalty, that kind of purpose, you can't teach it. You have to live it. The agents ran diagnostics. The outpost had been pinged remotely by a foreign signal, test run by cyber espionage systems designed to look for forgotten infrastructure. Without Red's key and confirmation, no one would have even known. Worse, they discovered that a recent software update installed by a local contractor had triggered a dormant vulnerability. That contractor, a young tech guy who'd recently volunteered to modernize the sheriff's system, was flagged for questioning. Red had noticed unusual network traffic weeks ago and tried calling a few retired contacts. One line worked. He left a message. The message triggered a buried alert that reached Homeland Security's highest clearance tier. Everything Red had done to walk into the station, the key, the name Black Warden. It had been the final step in an operation that had been sleeping for over 40 years. He wasn't crazy. He was the reason they were still standing. When the sheriff asked Agent Booker What would have happened if Red hadn't shown up? Her answer chilled the room. You wouldn't be here, she said plainly. Neither would this station. The implications were never made public. There were no interviews, no press release. But the lesson was loud enough for anyone who had ears to hear. We forget our protectors until they save us. We ignore the quiet ones until they're all that stands between us and collapse. And sometimes, the last person you expect to walk through, your door becomes the reason you get to walk out again. When it was all over, and the agents were loading back into their SUVs, Agent Booker turned to Bailey and said, he fulfilled his oath in silence. With dignity. You don't owe him an apology. You owe him a flag. Bailey didn't say anything. He just nodded and walked back inside. Red was offered a private ride home, but he declined. Said he preferred his truck. The same rusty Ford he'd driven for decades. As he pulled out of the lot, the deputies stood on the porch, watching him disappear into the drizzle. Not a word was said, but you could feel the weight in the air, like the whole world had just shifted a few inches. Days passed, then weeks. People whispered. Some thought it was just a weird story. Others believed it was all classified nonsense. But on the first Sunday of the next month, the flag at the sheriff's office was lowered at sunrise, then raised slowly alone, silent, ceremonial. And from then on, it happened every year. No memo, no plaque, just respect. As for Red, he never mentioned that night again. He went back to his garden, his grocery trips, his black coffee and worn-out porch chair.